The Ryanair strike is on the horizon. So what are the chances of the ongoing warfare that's taking place within the company right now being resolved anytime soon? Here's Robert Short.
Strikes, here and abroad. Ryanair's business model is undergoing its toughest test. Can it live with unions? And what will it mean for the 120 million people a year who fly with the airline? The Irish Airline Pilots Association, a branch of the union Forsa, has announced it's to strike for a fourth day on Friday of next week, the August bank holiday weekend. And it threatened further strikes. Its announcement followed a Ryanair decision to reduce the number of planes at its Dublin base in October from 30 to 24. As a result, it has issued protective notice to over 100 pilots and 200 cabin crew based here. The reasons it gave are the relative success of its Polish charter business and the negative impact of strikes here on its forward bookings. The bottom line is the company is clearly stating that strikes will have consequences.
I call it Ryanair roulette. The airline is basically saying to pilots employed in Ireland, right, this is a fight to the death and we're not going to lose.
The growing gap between both sides in this dispute prompted this intervention today from the Taoiseach, who was in Rome.
But I am very concerned at the escalation in the Ryanair dispute, particularly the impact it's going to have on holidaymakers, on everyday people who have spent months saving up for their holidays, who may now find themselves discommoded or rescheduled, or perhaps not being able to take that holiday. So, I'd really ask both Ryanair and the unions to think about the people, to think about those customers.
Ryanair is now facing industrial action on several fronts. Today, cabin crews in Italy staged a one-day strike. It's the second day of strikes by cabin crew in Spain, Portugal and Belgium. The scale of this strike is much bigger. 50,000 customers had their flights cancelled. And in Germany, the pilots' union there is continuing to ballot this month for industrial action. Different disputes over different issues. But if the escalation of the Dublin dispute is anything to go by, this summer of discontent for Ryanair passengers may be about to get even worse.
Robert Short there. I'm joined now by Joe Gill, Director of Corporate Broking at Goodbody Stockbrokers, and Bernard Harbor from Forsa. First, I'm just going to talk to you, Joe Gill, on your own. You're not here representing Ryanair, you're not a proxy for Ryanair, but you wrote a very strong piece actually in today's Irish Times, headlined "Ryanair must stand strong against strikers." But there does seem to be a feeling quite widespread that the airline want this fight.
I don't think that's the case. I think that the context here is that Ryanair is determined to grow its passenger volume by about 60 million over the next 5 years. That's a much faster pace of growth than is true across the entire European airline industry. In doing so, they're going to encounter incumbent airlines across Europe and fight with them for market share. All of those airlines are 100% unionised, so the unions there have a motivation to resist and oppose and put hurdles in the way of Ryanair's development. Within the company itself, there's been a very bad long-term history between Ryanair and unions that was quite abrasive, quite acerbic. Since December, that's changed. The company is putting resources in place to manage a multiplicity of union relationships across various functions.
Them very well.
Well, I'd actually disagree with that. I think we're in the middle of a process which only kicked off 9 months ago. There are multiple unions in different jurisdictions covering different functions: pilots, cabin crew, engineers. Each of them has their own approach, their own strategy. Many of them compete with each other. And Ryanair has had to put in place the resources and the HR negotiating expertise to deal with unions in a professional way. I think that process has been underway. They're continuing to add more seasoned negotiators to the process. And what you're seeing is this working through. And
but
what you ultimately want...
Joe, because I hear you and it sounds great. But look, they serve protective notices. They say they won't talk to them unless there's no sign of a strike. They're not exactly going the right way about trying to be conducive to some kind of a settlement here.
Well, I think that process started as being conducive towards settlement. There's been a lot of engagement, I think, as you'll hear from the union with the company. But we reached a point where this week the company has said that the daily strikes by pilots are affecting consumer demand and confidence in the Irish market. It's eroding fares, it's reducing profitability, it's forced them to take action to move assets out of Ireland to other markets. Now, that's not in the interests of passengers, in the interests of the airline, or in the interests of the pilots.
But if you listen to Ryanair, and I was saying to Kenny on the news tonight, he was saying, they are accommodating unions in other areas. They seem particularly determined not to accommodate these Irish pilots in Dublin.
Well, again, that's I'm not inside the room in these negotiations. You've got to discuss that with the union representative. But as I understand it, the union came forward with 11 points that they wanted addressed. I understand that 8 of them have been addressed. There's 3 that haven't. It has nothing to do with pay. I think the union has said itself, it's not complaining about pay. It's other issues that need to be considered, and these need to be brought to a head one way or the other.
But if they don't pay compensation to passengers, which is the newest story coming out, that's not really fair to passengers, is it?
But that's, again, I'm not sure where that will end up in terms of compensation or non-compensation. There's various compensatory packages available under European regulations.
But it's going to put more people off actually flying Ryanair if they're very worried.
Well, there's no doubt that forward bookings in Ryanair are being detrimentally affected right now. Like, Aer Lingus is having a field day at the expense of Ryanair in the Irish market because passengers are uncertain about their future. Long term, that's not good for Ryanair's employees or its shareholders or its management, and that's why this issue needs to be brought to a head. But it will, I believe, normalise over time because we're moving from a place where Ryanair had no relationship with its unions to having a professional, grown-up relationship with